the mountains of Kentucky, where tobacco grows in morning mist and stories weave through invisible threads of destiny, two men built a friendship so profound it defied all explanation. They recognized each other from the first instant, as if their souls had known each other before their eyes ever met. They worked together, laughed together, called each other brothers without knowing how literally true that word was. But when one of them fell on a tragic night, the other would discover a secret buried for 25 years, a secret so devastating it would explain everything. The inexplicable connection, the immediate recognition, the fraternal love they both felt but neither could properly name. This is the story of Daniel and Thomas, two brothers that destiny separated at birth and reunited years later, only to reveal the truth when it was already too late for one of them to know it. If you want to know how destiny can be both cruel and beautiful at the same time, give us a like, subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, share this video, and leave us in the comments. Do you believe souls recognize souls even when the mind doesn't know the truth? Now, prepare yourself for a story that will change how you see human connections. In the small hospital in Franklin County, in the heart of rural Kentucky, a stormy night would change the destiny of two families forever. Lightning tore through the sky while thunder made the windows of the old two-story building vibrate. It was 11 at night when two women arrived almost simultaneously at the maternity ward. The first was Elizabeth Sullivan, wife of Mr. Henry Sullivan, owner of the most prosperous tobacco and cattle ranch in the entire region. At 35 years old, after 10 years of marriage without children, she was finally about to give birth. Mr. Henry paced nervously through the corridor, his fine suit contrasting with the peeling walls of the hospital. He smoked cigarette after cigarette while awaiting news of his firstborn. For him, this child wasn't just a baby. He was the heir, the future of his ranching empire. The second woman was Carmen Rivers, a young woman barely 19 years old who had arrived alone, soaked by rain, holding her belly with both hands. She had no family. She had no money. She had nothing except the baby growing inside her and an uncertain future that terrified her. The father of her child had disappeared when he learned of the pregnancy. Carmen worked cleaning houses, but the pregnancy had cost her the few jobs she had. She lived in a rented room where a mattress barely fit on the floor. The births occurred minutes apart. Elizabeth Sullivan gave birth first, at 11:42 p.m. It was a boy, strong and healthy, who cried vigorously from the first moment. Dr. Medina, a 60-year-old man with decades of experience, smiled as he cleaned the baby. "A beautiful son, Mrs. Elizabeth," he announced. "Your husband will be very proud." Mr. Henry entered the room with tears in his eyes, something no one in the region had ever seen in this man known for his toughness. He took his son in his arms and felt that his life finally had the purpose he had sought for years. 15 minutes later, in a much more modest room at the end of the hallway, Carmen also gave birth to a boy. But her labor was difficult, complicated. When the baby finally emerged, Carmen was exhausted beyond what words could express. The nurse attending her, a young woman named Rose, wrapped the baby and briefly placed him in Carmen's trembling arms. "He's a beautiful boy," she said with a forced smile, trying to infuse hope into a clearly desperate situation. Carmen looked at her son with a mixture of love and desperation that broke the heart. He was perfect, with a head of dark hair and delicate features. But she knew, with a certainty that crushed her, that she had no way to raise him. "Nurse," she said with weak voice, tears running down her cheeks, "please, take the child. I can't keep him. I have nothing to give him. Please, find a family that can give him the life he deserves." Rose, the young nurse who had begun working there only 6 months earlier, felt her heart squeeze. She took the baby, her mind confused about what to do. It was then that everything changed. In Elizabeth Sullivan's room, the initial joy had given way to growing concern. The baby, who had seemed healthy at birth, was now breathing with difficulty. His skin had taken an alarming bluish tone. Dr. Medina was urgently called back. What he discovered filled him with dread. The baby had a severe congenital heart defect. "He needs specialized surgery in Louisville," he said with grave voice. "And he needs it now. He might not survive the journey." Mr. Henry wasted no time. He immediately made arrangements to transport his son to the city that same night, despite the storm. But Elizabeth was too weak to travel. The birth had been difficult and she needed rest. It was in this moment of chaos that Rose, standing in the corridor holding Carmen's baby, observed all the commotion. She saw the anguish on Mr. Henry's face, heard the doctor's words about the baby who would probably die, and in her young mind, overwhelmed by the night of intense events, a terrible idea began to form. Carmen's baby had no future except an orphanage. The Sullivans' baby would probably die anyway. What if? Before her conscience could stop her, before she could fully think through the implications, Rose acted. In the confusion of the stormy night, with lights flickering from power outages, she switched the babies. She carried Carmen's baby to Elizabeth's room and placed him in the prepared crib. Then she took the sick Sullivan baby and carried him to where the abandoned baby should go. In the chaos of the moment, no one noticed the exchange. Mr. Henry departed for Louisville carrying the baby he believed was his son, Carmen's healthy baby. The Sullivan baby, the child who had been born with the defective heart, was registered as Carmen Rivers' son and taken the next day to the Sisters of Charity orphanage. The baby who had been born sick died 3 days later in the orphanage, his small heart finally giving out. He was buried in the orphanage cemetery, a nameless grave among many others. No one knew that this baby was really the Sullivans' biological son. Carmen left the hospital the next day without seeing again the baby she believed she had abandoned. She walked under the bright sun, her heart broken but convinced she had done the right thing for her son. She never knew that the baby she had given birth to was now in the arms of one of the richest families in the region. 3 years later, Carmen died from an illness that with better medical care she might have survived. She took to the grave the secret of a son she never really knew. Rose, the nurse who had caused everything, lived with her secret. In the first days she was terrified that someone would discover what she had done. But no one did. Mr. Henry and Elizabeth were too relieved by their son's miraculous recovery to question anything. The baby they had brought back from Louisville, after specialists determined it had been a misdiagnosis, was growing strong and healthy. It was a miracle, Elizabeth would say. And Mr. Henry, though not religious, couldn't argue with that interpretation. Carmen's son, now known as Daniel Sullivan, grew up in absolute luxury. The Sullivan Ranch was a world unto itself. Thousands of acres of tobacco fields and cattle pastures, a restored colonial-style farmhouse, employees, and everything money could buy. Daniel was raised with the best tutors, the best clothes, the best horses. But more importantly, he was raised with love. Meanwhile, in a small town 2 hours away, another child was growing up under very different circumstances. In the humble home of the Walsh family, a farming family who worked leased land, a boy named Thomas was growing up surrounded by love but not comforts. The Walshes couldn't have children. After years of trying, they had accepted they would never be parents. But one afternoon, when visiting the town market, they heard a baby crying in an alley. Wrapped in old rags, abandoned next to the garbage, was a newborn. They took him to the hospital, but no one claimed the baby. Authorities suggested the orphanage, but Mary and Robert Walsh felt this was the son God finally sent them. They initiated the adoption process and, 6 months later, Thomas Walsh officially had a family. He didn't have Daniel's life of luxury, but he had something equally valuable. Parents who adored him and who taught him the value of honest work, the importance of dignity, and the power of true love. The years passed transforming both boys into men. Daniel grew tall and strong, with genuine passion for ranch work that his adoptive father had instilled in him. At 23 years old, after studying agricultural management in Lexington, he returned to the ranch to help his father. Thomas, for his part, had become one of the best ranch workers in the entire region. At 23 years old, his reputation for being honest, hard-working, and exceptionally skilled with cattle and tobacco cultivation made him highly sought after. It was Mr. Henry who, seeking to expand his ranch operations, heard about a certain Thomas Walsh whose skill with livestock and tobacco was legendary. "They say that boy can make tobacco grow on rocks," his foreman commented. "Hire him," Mr. Henry ordered. "We need the best workers if we're going to expand." The day Thomas arrived at Sullivan Ranch for the job interview, Daniel was in the main courtyard reviewing accounts. He looked up when he heard footsteps and his eyes met Thomas's. Both froze. It was as if an invisible lightning bolt connected them. Daniel felt something move in his chest, a sensation of recognition he couldn't explain. Thomas experienced the same thing, an inexplicable familiarity, as if he had known this rich man forever. "You must be Thomas Walsh," Daniel finally said, extending his hand. "Yes, sir," Thomas responded, shaking the offered hand. The physical contact intensified that strange sensation of connection. They talked for more than an hour, supposedly about the job, but the conversation drifted toward more personal topics. Daniel shared things he normally wouldn't share with an employee. Thomas, usually reserved, found himself opening his heart. "It's strange," Daniel said at the end of the meeting, "but I feel like I know you from before. Have we met?" "I don't think so," Thomas replied, "but I feel the same. It's like, I don't know how to explain it. Like we're old friends reuniting," Daniel completed. Thomas nodded. Exactly that. When Thomas left, hired to start the following week, Daniel sat thinking about the strange worker. There was something about him, something that made Daniel want to know him better, spend time with him. Thomas walked back to his town with similar thoughts. He had known many bosses in his years of work. But Daniel Sullivan was different. There was a warmth in him, an authenticity that was rare in men of his position. The following months were transformative for both. The friendship they developed defied all social norms. Daniel, who should maintain professional distance, constantly sought Thomas's company. They worked together in the tobacco fields, shared lunches, conversed for hours. The other workers noticed and commented. "The boss has a favorite," some said with resentment. But most saw that there was something different in this relationship, something that went beyond simple favoritism. "It's like they're brothers," old Ethan, the foreman, once commented. And without knowing how literally true his words were, he had perfectly captured the essence of their relationship. Daniel found in Thomas something he had never had, a true companion. Someone with whom he could be completely himself, without the pretensions his position normally required. With Thomas, he could admit his doubts, his fears, his insecurities. Thomas found in Daniel a sense of belonging that had been missing all his life. It wasn't just that Daniel treated him with respect. It was that with Daniel, Thomas felt seen, truly seen, in a way he had never experienced. "You know," Daniel told him one night while drinking coffee after a long day of work, "I feel like you're the brother I never had. I don't know why I'm telling you this, but since you arrived, I feel like my life has more meaning." Thomas felt his throat close with emotion. "I consider you a brother too. I don't have blood family. I don't know who my biological mother was. But with you I feel like I have family. We are family," Daniel affirmed. "Not by blood, but by something deeper. By choice." They remained silent, both feeling the depth of the connection they shared. If only they had known the truth, if only they had known the secret buried in their past, they would have understood why they felt what they felt. But destiny wasn't ready yet to reveal its secrets. After a year working together at Sullivan Ranch, Daniel proposed a trip. They needed to buy new equipment for tobacco processing at an agricultural fair in Nashville. The trip would take several days, requiring them to stay in the city. "I want you to come with me," Daniel told Thomas. "Not as an employee, but as a partner. I need your opinion on the equipment. You know tobacco better than I do." Thomas accepted, honored by the trust. The trip was extraordinary. Away from the ranch, away from the social structures that normally defined them, Daniel and Thomas were simply two friends exploring a city, sharing meals, laughing, talking about dreams and hopes. One night, after visiting several bars in downtown Nashville, they decided to enter an establishment called the Jukebox. It was a lively place with music, people dancing, the smell of whiskey in the air. They sat at a corner table, drank, enjoyed the music. Daniel felt completely relaxed, happier than he had been in a long time. These days with Thomas had been the best of his life. But at another table, a group of men had been drinking heavily. One of them, a large man named Maurice with a reputation for violence when drinking, had been watching Daniel and Thomas. "Look at those two," Maurice murmured to his companions, his voice slurring from alcohol. "The rich boy and his lapdog. They probably don't even know what real work is." His friends tried to calm him, but Maurice was in the mood to fight. He stood up staggering and headed toward Daniel and Thomas's table. "Hey, rich boy," he said with loud voice, drawing the attention of the entire bar. "Why don't you buy everyone around? Or doesn't Daddy's money stretch that far?" Daniel kept his voice calm. "Friend, we don't want trouble. We're just having a quiet night." "Friend," Maurice spat. "I'm not your friend, rich kid. And neither is your little boyfriend." The insult was calculated to provoke. Thomas stood up immediately. "Take that back," he said with low but threatening voice. "Or what?" Maurice challenged, pushing his face close to Thomas's. What happened next occurred so fast that many didn't see exactly how it started. Maurice pushed Thomas. Thomas pushed back. Maurice's friends stood up. Daniel moved to protect Thomas. And then someone threw a punch. The fight that followed was chaotic. Daniel was in the middle, desperately trying to reach Thomas, to get him out before someone got seriously hurt. He saw Thomas struggling with Maurice. He saw the flash of something metallic. "Thomas, watch out!" Daniel shouted. But it was too late. Maurice, in a moment of blind rage, pulled out a knife he carried on his belt. In the confusion of the fight, the knife found its mark. It entered Thomas's side between the ribs, penetrating deeply. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Thomas let out a choked sound, his eyes widening with surprise more than pain. The fight stopped when people realized what had happened. Thomas fell. Daniel reached his side in an instant, crouching to catch him before he hit the ground. "No, no, no," Daniel repeated, carefully lowering Thomas. "You're going to be okay. We'll get help." Blood spread across Thomas's shirt at an alarming rate. Daniel pressed his hands against the wound, desperately trying to stop the flow, but blood seeped between his fingers. "Daniel," Thomas said, his voice already weak, "listen to me." "Don't talk," Daniel said, tears beginning to stream down his face. "Save your energy. The ambulance is coming." But Thomas knew. He had seen enough wounds in his life to recognize when one was fatal. "Brother," he said with barely audible voice, "because that's what you are to me. I want you to know that these months with you were the best of my life." "No," Daniel sobbed. "You're not saying goodbye. I won't allow it." Thomas lifted a trembling hand and placed it on Daniel's arm. "I never had real family. But you were my brother. In my pocket. There are papers. Make sure." And then, before he could finish, before he could say what he had wanted to say, Thomas Walsh exhaled his last breath. His hand fell from Daniel's arm, and his body went still. "No." Daniel screamed. "Thomas, no. Don't leave me." But there was no response. Thomas was gone. His life ended on the dirty floor of a bar, victim of a senseless fight. Daniel held his friend's lifeless body, sobbing openly. Around him, people watched in shocked silence. Police arrived, followed by paramedics who confirmed what everyone already knew. Maurice was arrested. Daniel gave his statement like an automaton, in shock. Thomas's body was taken to the morgue. And Daniel remained alone in the hospital, his hands still stained with his friend's blood, unable to process that Thomas was really gone. If this story is moving you, share it with someone and let us know in the comments. Have you lost someone important without being able to tell them everything you felt? The next day, while making arrangements for Thomas's funeral, Daniel remembered his friend's last words about papers in his pocket. With trembling hands, he searched through the blood-stained clothes the hospital had saved. He found several papers, some receipts, a photo of his adoptive parents, and a folded document that looked official. Daniel opened it carefully. It was Thomas's adoption certificate. It listed his adoptive parents as Mary and Robert Walsh. But there was other information that made Daniel's heart stop. Place of birth: Franklin County Hospital. Date of birth: Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. It was the same date as his own birthday. The same hospital where he had been born. With hands now trembling violently, Daniel pulled out his own driver's license where his birth registration data was listed. He compared it with Thomas's document. Same hospital. Same date. Same approximate time. But there was more. On Thomas's certificate there was an almost illegible notation in the corner. Found abandoned. Possible twin of case 1847A. Daniel felt the world stop. He drove back to the hospital where he had been born, driving like a madman the 2 hours back to Franklin County. He arrived demanding to see records from 25 years ago. The records nurse was an older woman who had worked there for decades. When Daniel explained what he was looking for, she frowned. That night, I remember it. There was a terrible storm. 2 women gave birth almost at the same time. 2 women? Daniel asked, his heart beating wildly. Yes. One was Elizabeth Sullivan, your mother. The other was a poor young girl, Carmen Rivers. She gave birth and abandoned the baby. But there was confusion that night. The Sullivan's baby was very sick, was urgently taken to Louisville. Daniel felt everything falling into place in the most terrible way. And Carmen's baby? He was registered for adoption, but he never officially arrived at the orphanage. The records are confused. There was a young nurse, Rose, who suddenly resigned days later. Some said she had made a mistake that night, but no one knew exactly what. Daniel searched more. He found the record of his own birth. And there, in small print, was the truth that had been hidden for 25 years. Twins. Second born. Diverted to adoption by maternal request. Twins. The word exploded in his mind like a bomb. He and Thomas had been twins. Twin brothers. Not brothers in spirit, but brothers by blood. Literal brothers who had shared the womb, who had entered the world separated by minutes. Daniel fell to his knees there in the records office, the documents clutched in his hands, sobbing with an intensity that frightened the nurse. Everything made sense now. The inexplicable connection, the immediate recognition, the fraternal love they both had felt but neither had been able to properly name. They had been brothers all along. And Thomas had died never knowing it. He had died calling him brother, speaking a truth deeper than either of them knew, but without knowing the reality of his words. Why? Daniel shouted to the indifferent universe. Why allow us to find each other only to rip him away like this? Why give me a brother only to take him from me before I could even know what I had? The funeral was 2 days later. Daniel insisted it be in Franklin County, near the hospital where they both had been born. He paid for everything. The best casket, flowers that filled the chapel, a dignified service. More people attended than expected. The Walshes, Thomas's adoptive parents, cried inconsolably for the son they had raised with so much love. Workers from various ranches where Thomas had worked came to pay respects, and townspeople who had heard the tragic story. During the service, Daniel spoke. His voice broke several times. Thomas Walsh was my best friend, he began. He was the best man I've ever known. But what I didn't know until it was too late, what he never knew, is that he was also my brother. A murmur of surprise ran through the chapel. Daniel lifted the documents for all to see. We were born the same day, in the same hospital, from the same mother. But for reasons involving a terrible mistake on that stormy night 25 years ago, we were separated. I was raised by a wealthy family. He ended up being adopted by a humble family. We lived completely different lives. And yet, when we finally met years later, we recognized something in each other. We became friends immediately, brothers in spirit before knowing we were brothers by blood. Tears flowed freely down his face now. And now he's gone. He's gone without ever knowing the truth. Without knowing that when he called me brother in his last moments, he was speaking a truth deeper than either of us knew. I'll spend the rest of my life regretting that I didn't discover it sooner. But I'll also spend the rest of my life grateful that destiny reunited us, that I had those months with him, that I could call him friend, even if I never knew to call him what he really was. My twin brother. There wasn't a dry eye in the chapel. Thomas's adoptive parents, Mary and Robert Walsh, embraced Daniel after the service, crying together for the son and brother they had lost. He loved you both so much, Daniel told them. He always spoke of you with such affection. You were the best parents he could have had. Mary took Daniel's hands in hers. And you were the brother he needed. Though neither of you knew it, You found your way back to each other. That has to mean something. In the following months, Daniel became obsessed with discovering exactly what had happened that night 25 years ago. He hired private investigators. He reviewed every hospital document. He spoke with every person who had worked there at that time. Finally, he found Rose, the nurse who had been on duty that night. She lived in a remote town, had left nursing decades ago. When Daniel arrived at her door, she was a woman of almost 50 years old, with gray hair and tired eyes of someone who had carried a heavy secret for a long time. "I know who you are," she said when Daniel introduced himself. "I've been waiting for this day for 25 years. They sat in her humble living room, and Rose finally told the complete truth. She spoke of that chaotic stormy night, of 2 babies born almost simultaneously, of a sick baby who would probably die and another healthy one with no future, and of the terrible decision she had made in a moment of panic and confusion. "I thought I was saving 2 lives, she said with tears running down her wrinkled cheeks. The Sullivan's baby was going to die anyway. Carmen's baby was going to an orphanage with no hope. I thought if I switched them, at least one would have a good life. But you were wrong," Daniel said with cold voice. "You separated 2 brothers. You gave me a life that wasn't mine while my brother grew up without knowing his true family." "I know," Rose sobbed. "I've lived with that guilt every day of my life. I resigned from the hospital because I couldn't keep working there. I moved away from everything to try to forget, but I never could. And now you tell me one of them is dead." Daniel felt rage, but also a strange compassion for this woman who had made a terrible mistake with intentions she believed were good. "My brother died without knowing the truth," he finally said. "That's something I'll have to live with. And you'll have to live with your part in that." He stood to leave, but at the door he stopped. "But I also have to thank you for something. Because if you hadn't done what you did, Thomas and I would never have known each other the way we did. We would have grown up as brothers, yes, but we wouldn't have had that special friendship, that choice to love each other without knowing we were destined to do so. There's a strange beauty in that. We chose each other before knowing we were family. And that choice, that connection we built without knowing the truth, that was real. That was pure." Daniel never married. Despite social pressure, he simply couldn't. "My brother was the deepest connection of my life," he once told his adoptive father. "And now that he's gone, I feel like half of myself is missing." Mr. Henry, who now knew the truth about the baby switch, had aged 10 years in a matter of months. The revelation that Daniel wasn't his biological son had shaken him deeply, but his love for Daniel never wavered. "Blood or no blood," he told Daniel, "you're my son. I've loved you as such for 25 years, and that doesn't change. But I deeply regret that you were separated from your brother. I regret that you didn't grow up together." Daniel established a foundation in Thomas's name, dedicated to helping adopted children connect with their biological families when possible. "No one else should go through what we went through," he would say. "No one else should lose a brother without even knowing they had one." Every year, on the anniversary of Thomas's death, Daniel traveled to Nashville to visit the grave. He brought fresh flowers, spent hours there talking to his brother as if Thomas could hear him. "I miss you, brother," he would say each time. "Every day I miss you. And every day I wonder what our life would have been like if we had grown up together. But I'm also grateful for the months we had. Because we chose each other. Before knowing we were brothers, we were already brothers at heart." Daniel also grew closer to the Walshes, Thomas's adoptive parents. They became his second family, and he cared for them financially for the rest of their lives. "You raised my brother," he told them. "You gave him love when I couldn't. You're my family too." The years passed. Daniel aged, but his memory of Thomas never faded. Every memory became more precious, more polished by time. He could perfectly remember the sound of Thomas's laughter, the way his eyes shone when he talked about something he was passionate about, the exact timbre of his voice. In his final years, Daniel became a benevolent hermit. He spent his days working in the tobacco fields, keeping alive the connection with the work he and Thomas had shared. When Daniel finally passed away at the age of 67, his last will contain a specific request. He wanted to be buried next to Thomas in Nashville. "We spent too much time separated in life," he had written. "I don't want to be separated from him in death. We are brothers, twins, and twins should be together." His request was fulfilled. Daniel Sullivan was buried next to Thomas Walsh, their graves side by side under a magnolia tree. The headstones were engraved with an inscription Daniel had specified. Daniel and Thomas, twin brothers separated at birth, reunited by destiny, united by love. Blood connected them before they were born, the heart recognized them when they met, and eternity keeps them together now. The story of Daniel and Thomas teaches us profound truths about human connections. It reminds us that some relationships transcend logic, that some connections are so deep they exist on a level that goes beyond conscious understanding. It teaches us that true love doesn't need labels to be real. Daniel and Thomas loved each other as brothers before knowing they were. Their connection didn't depend on knowledge of their kinship. It was fundamental, rooted in something deeper than documents or birth certificates. This story invites us to reflect on the people in our lives with whom we feel an inexplicable connection. Perhaps they're not blood brothers, but they're family in all the ways that matter. It also reminds us of the importance of valuing every moment with the people we love. Daniel and Thomas had only months together before tragedy separated them. But those months were filled with love, genuine friendship, and a connection that transcended all social barriers. It teaches us about the consequences of decisions. A nurse made a decision in a moment of chaos, believing she was doing the right thing. And that decision changed the course of two lives, separating brothers who should have grown up together. But it also shows us that even from the greatest tragedies something beautiful can emerge. Because if Daniel and Thomas had grown up together as brothers, perhaps they wouldn't have had that special friendship they built when they met as adults. They wouldn't have had the experience of choosing each other. Their story became legend in the Kentucky tobacco region. It's told on nights around the fire, whispered in the tobacco fields, taught as a lesson about destiny, family, and the power of invisible connections that unite souls. And some say that on quiet afternoons, when the wind blows softly through the cemetery where both brothers rest, you can hear voices in the air. Two voices conversing, laughing, finally able to fully enjoy the brotherhood they shared in life, but that only one of them came to consciously know. Blood connected them from the moment of conception. Destiny separated them at birth. The heart reunited them years later. And love kept them together even after death. This is the story of Daniel and Thomas, two twin brothers that the world tried to keep separate but whose souls recognized each other anyway. It's a story about the invisible blood that runs between people who are destined to connect, about recognition that transcends reason, and about love that persists even when truth remains hidden. May their story remind us to love deeply while we can, to value the inexplicable connections we feel with certain people, and never assume we'll have more time. Because as Daniel and Thomas discovered, life is fragile, time is limited, and the most important truths sometimes reveal themselves when it's already too late. But also may their story remind us that true love transcends knowledge. They didn't need to know they were brothers to love each other as such. Their connection was so deep, so fundamental, that it existed independently of birth certificates or hospital records. They were brothers. They knew it in their hearts before their minds could comprehend it. And that truth, that brotherhood of the soul, that's what really mattered in the end. Thank you for joining us in this story of fraternal love, cruel destiny, and connections that transcend death. If it moved you, share it. If it made you reflect, leave us a comment. And if you have someone in your life with whom you feel a special connection, tell them today. Don't wait, because you never know how much time you'll have to say the words that matter.